Could you believe that in this day and age, we're facing a time in which women can actually be criminalized for a miscarriage?
Everybody says she miscarried at home. No, no. What she did is she went into labor at home and gave birth at home.
You return to the hospital, a place that's supposed to be compassionate and caring, and the first thing that happens is the nurse calls the cops. So many millions of women uncertain about their future, we ask that you join us. Should it ever be possible that a woman can actually be arrested for having a stillborn or a miscarriage? The decision of this case can become a historical turning point in women's health. We discuss the details and how it impacts your health. We thank you for joining. Be sure to click subscribe. Of note, hospital records have now been reviewed. This discussion is based on information from media sources. You heard us correctly. Having a stillbirth, having a miscarriage, depending on the laws in the state, a woman can actually be criminalized. Today, we're going to talk about a very concerning case. And yes, we're going to talk about the details of the case, but we're going to focus on the greater topics. And there's greater topics of disparity, of women's health, and the direction that we're going in this country that now leave so many millions of women uncertain about their future in respect to their reproductive rights. So we're going to spend a lot of time today just dissecting through this particular tragic story. So Olivia, I wish we could have you back on the platform to have a more joyous occasion. But I'm certainly thankful that you have joined us today to share your insight on this very tragic case. So let's start by describing what you found out, what you've heard about this particular young woman, and what are some of the key points that you've heard about this particular case.
It's so nice to be back. Thank you for having me. What I read is that in Ohio, there is a law, right, that is supposed to be protecting. Really, it was created to protect against grave digging, right? It was called something like harm to the corpse law. And that's why it was created, so that people would stop stealing corpses or even doing things to corpses after they passed, right? Whether they be things, unmentionable things we want to talk about. Since Roe versus Wade, there have been a lot of ways that when you kind of police a woman and kind of even try to criminalize her for getting pregnant and what happens thereafter, you've seen a lot of the creative ways that this can come across and kind of put women in a really bad way. So this woman was pregnant. She was 22 weeks, which is 5.5 months-ish. And she had gone to the hospital 3 times because she was worried about the state of her pregnancy. She was told, from what I read in the verbiage, that she was told that her pregnancy was non-viable and therefore went back home every time without any treatment or a plan. Then she miscarried in the toilet. When she went back to the hospital after that, bleeding and worried, they asked her where her baby was, and she said she left it at home, and therefore, subsequently, a nurse called the police. She heard nothing for 10 days, something like that. Then when she heard something, it was the police who showed up at her door, arresting her for a crime otherwise known as harm to a corpse. And that just brings up so many feelings, questions, emotions, and just like, what?
It sure does. And let's also point out the fact that she's an African American woman, which I do think play a role in a lot of the things that's been going on. As of recent, there has been a lot of pressure for the prosecutor to drop the case because apparently they do have the ability to drop these cases. And certainly with the outrage of women's rights group and minority-led groups, there's been tons of pressure for this particular prosecutor to drop this particular case. The county prosecutor, Dennis Watkins, has refused to drop this case, and it is basically given the verbiage that it's out of his hands, that he doesn't have the power to do so, which many have questioned, including Ohio Physicians for Reproductive Rights groups. That basically has said that the response of the prosecutor to decline to drop the case is quote unquote troubling. As Olivia has mentioned, we have a lot of questions about this case, about not necessarily the details so much, but about the response to her care. And a lot of people have asked questions justifiably. We have questions about why was she returned home 3 times without a plan, and what's really the proper approach to a woman that's experiencing a pregnancy loss, and that perhaps is probably one of the root causes of what ultimately happened. So let's talk about that. Being returned home, you're 22 weeks. And I think at the time with the initial presentation, she was 21 and 5 weeks. And apparently in Ohio, their abortion limitations ends between 22 and 24 weeks. So that does play a role in some of the decision making with this particular case. But even the fact that she goes into the hospital, there's some fetal activity, but she is determined to have what's called preterm premature rupture of membranes. So she breaks her water bag at 21 plus weeks, which is essentially non-viable. So this non-viable word has been probably one of the issues, more confusing part of this particular case. So she was deemed not to have a viable pregnancy. But as you heard, we said that there was a fetal heart. So let's go through the ways in which we use non-viable and what it may mean and what it may not mean. So what was your first impression when you heard that they documented that she had a non-viable pregnancy, essentially due to the fact that she had these preterm premature rupture of membranes, which led to a severe decrease in her fluid around the baby. And that led to a poor prognosis of the pregnancy.
Well, see, the first article I read didn't say that. It said that she had a non-viable pregnancy, went home and ended up having a miscarriage. So to me, based on the way that read, when they said non-viable, I thought that meant non-viable as in no heartbeat. This baby was not alive anymore. Turns out, if you read other articles or you look more the way you presented it, it means non-viable. When we use the term viability in pregnancy and women's health, it means that the baby would not survive outside of the mother's body, right? If you have great health care and great machines, now that is 23 weeks in a lot of places. They will do life-saving measures on a 23-week fetus, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be 24, depending on which country you're in, it can be even higher.
Mm-hmm.
So if they meant non-viable, just meaning this baby's still alive, but it's not looking good because the water broke, it's only 22 weeks or 21 weeks and 5 days, which is 2 days away. My questions then are, why didn't they offer to keep her in the hospital? One, right? They could have done something like, we're going to keep you here for monitoring, prolonged monitoring to see how this baby's doing. That's one. Two, could have been, the plan is to come back to the hospital in 24 hours or follow up with your healthcare provider in 24 hours. There were a lot of things that I think maybe could have been done to be compassionate healthcare versus sending somebody home. Did she get prenatal care? Was she getting prenatal care? That's a big deal, because if she's not, then it really does fall on the way the community standards of compassionate care are practiced. Where, in my experience, if we have somebody who is not getting care somewhere and her prenatal care is the hospital, then we follow up the way we would in a clinic. You're coming back to see me in 2 days or 1 day, right? Because I am your safety net. If you have prenatal care, a doctor that you go to, a midwife, somebody who's taking care of you, that has the ability to take care of what is now happening, then it is follow up with your provider in 24 hours. So there should have been a plan. There was no comment about what her plan of care was. I mean, imagine, clearly this was a wanted pregnancy. How do you know? Because she went a couple of times before this happened to get help. So this person wants this baby, wants this pregnancy, is going through the fear, the pain of like, what is happening? Is my baby dying? And then she goes through it alone at home, and then you arrest her for it. I don't, there's, so I really feel like there was a lack of compassion,
Yes.
and just treating somebody and what you're going through. She's literally going through the death of her baby.
Yeah, I think it's mind blowing. When I first heard this particular case, number one, I was really shocked that this case even exists, especially because it was at a time where there was so much attention to a mom in Texas who went before the courts for the ability to terminate her pregnancy, and subsequently what happened to that. I'm not going to touch on the details of that particular case, but this case was happening at the same time, and there was literally no publicity about this case. And I would say, I'm not surprised, right? I like the fact that you touched on the compassionate care, because I did feel like if reading that someone went back and forth to a hospital in 3 days, it's mind-blowing to me, and given what was going on. So it's not that she was going back and forth asking questions about, I don't know, name it, I have a cold or I have a cough. She was going back and forth because she knew she broke her water, and she knew she was before the threshold in which a baby can survive outside of the womb. So you have a mom that's dealing with the loss of a desired child.
Yeah.
So now she has to experience the loss of the pregnancy, which is already a grueling experience, and going through grief. And now she encounters first what? The legal system. So even before, I'm glad that you mentioned that she went back home, she delivered on her own. And then the next representative of society that shows up is law enforcement. So the first thing,
Can I just say,
yes,
everybody says she miscarried at home. No, no. What she did is she went into labor at home and gave birth at home.
that's
Like,
true.
I want people to understand the gravity of what that
That's
is,
true.
knowing that your baby's probably not alive. She gave birth to a stillborn baby at home by herself after having sought help 3 different times.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, as you demonize people and criminalize people and dehumanize people, you have to really understand what was happening, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's an important distinction because when we say it, it almost makes it seem like it's not what it was. And that's what I'll say. And that is simply,
Hmm.
she had to actually push a formed baby out of her vagina, go through the stages of labor, have the pains, do all of that. Um, and I really want that to be understood. Sorry.
That's an excellent point. No, I think that's an excellent point because I think that does, like, we know what that means, but I think the public don't really understand. And I think that does put into context really what her experience was like. And not only did she do it, but she did it by herself, right? And she did it without what sounds like any guidance, because had she had guidance, perhaps she would have known what to do when that happened. So it sounds like not only may she have been frustrated with the whole system, but that she had no true instructions on what to do. And so you return to the hospital, a place that's supposed to be compassionate and caring, and the first thing that happens is the nurse calls the cops.
And why? Why is that? Well, and I have seen that happen a lot with
Yes,
Black women.
yes. But even before that, when she's seeking care, the first thing she encounters is the legal system. Let's talk about that. So day number two. So day number one, she has the diagnosis, she is told what's going on, and she's sent back home. Day number two, she returns to the hospital, and now there is legal proceedings within the hospital administrative group to determine whether or not a doctor can help her. So now you have interference with the care of a patient by the legal system, or at least the administrative system, which is subsequent to the legal system, that is now interfering with a doctor's ability to directly care for a patient because of the fear of the consequences of being miscategorized as an abortion.
Which is,
So, yes. What's your thought about that?
I mean, I just wish, I was just having this conversation the other day with my little cousin who's 16.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish people understood what they were voting for and what we are talking about when we are saying, I believe that abortion is wrong, and I am forcing the issue of criminalizing a woman for not carrying a baby to term. Those are very different, distinct things. And this is how it presents. You have to remember, human beings, we are incredibly creative. And so when you take this and you say this is completely wrong, categorically wrong, no matter what happens, criminalizing means you go to jail. You can lose your life for this. You're essentially saying that, and it is almost impossible to diagnose unless you know for a fact and you saw it, the difference between an abortion and a miscarriage, right? Like you don't
Yeah,
know. A neighbor can say she was pregnant yesterday and she didn't miscarry, she aborted. How would you know the difference?
exactly.
And now she's
Exactly.
going to jail and anybody can cry, which it's like the Salem witch trials. It's like anybody can say it. And now this is what happened. So now the doctor couldn't do his job, or the physicians, whomever was
Right.
caring for, couldn't do their job
Right.
because now they're afraid of whatever these consequences made up by whomever, the state, the government, whomever now decides how we are criminalizing these behaviors and these things that are happening.
And mind you, also, one of the measures of medicine that's constantly being monitored is the delay of care. And so here you have the legal system that's interfering, that now is causing, at minimum, it certainly caused way more than that. But even outside of knowing the outcome of this particular pregnancy, at minimum, for women now, it's causing a delay in their care. And that delay can lead to situations like this, but it can also lead to even more even more devastating outcomes with the loss of life of not just the pregnancy and the baby, but the loss of life of the mom as well. And as Olivia, as you mentioned, we now have a system that is criminalizing moms, and with the potential of being placed into jail, because that's a potential outcome of this particular trial, is that she can actually go to jail for this and be fined. So not only is she being financially drained with the process of having lawyer legal fees and everything that goes with that, loss of productivity with work, and not to mention she is still mourning the loss of her child in the midst of all of this, but also the potential of going to jail for the loss of the child that she's already grieving and mourning. And for women who have other kids, you may be looking at the separation of a mom from her other children, from her family, from her responsibilities. It is a systemic destruction of the family structure, and using it under the guise of, or the disguise, I should say, of
protecting life.
Protecting life, with the disregard for the other lives that are impacted. So it's very devastating to hear this particular woman's experience, but how typical is it for a Black woman, right? She goes to the hospital, she becomes legalized. She goes to the hospital, she gets returned home without care. Doesn't look like she's getting any compassionate care at all. Doesn't even any measure of anyone speaking to her, a counselor, a therapist, any type of care for her mental health, even during this whole process. At the time, yes, if you have no choice but to go through the whole legal proceedings, did you make the effort? Were you compassionate enough to recognize that this could have a severe impact on this woman's mental health? Well, now for sure. But even at that point before the outcome, did you make an effort to provide her support, especially if she had if she endured childbirth at home by herself? That means probably it was known that she didn't have support. So she was sent home without support to basically give birth on her own. Not only that, I also want to touch on the fact that she was sent home ruptured.
That's what I'm saying. That's
Let's talk about, okay, what did you think when you read, because I know what I thought when I read that she had ruptured membranes. And
oh my God, her risk of infection, the risk of everything going sideways goes up. I've just never seen it in practice that you send a woman home, especially preterm premature rupture of membrane. Why wasn't she hospitalized? I understand that she was previable, meaning if this baby comes, there's nothing we can do, but that's the point. Then the baby is coming. I mean, that's what you're there for. You are the safety net. You were supposed to be there. There have been cases where women can last a long time, but they're hospitalized, right? They're given IV fluids, nothing, inside the body, all of these things to really minimize risk of infection. She already had gone to the hospital, therefore meaning her risk of infection was already through the roof.
Yeah.
Right? All of it. Risk for her, let alone the baby, right? This means this baby's probably not going to make it. And I don't know why they didn't hospitalize her. Why didn't they keep her? Why didn't they? I mean, and again, as a midwife, as a certified nurse midwife, I have seen this. I have cared for patients like this, but it is not my specialty. This is usually where I would now defer to my physician colleagues, or the high-risk specialists who manage these type of things. So I'd be really curious to know, Dr. Moore, what popped out for you and what would you have done? Like, what seemed to you like, this is crazy?
So typically we keep these patients in-house. After a non-standardized period of assessment in a hospital, it is technically acceptable to do home care for periviable PROM. Because even if you do not want to necessarily participate, right, and do anything proactive to terminate the pregnancy, even though the prognosis was very poor, you can at least give the woman a bed to lay in, right? So that if in the instance that she does need help, then you are immediately available to help her. Especially given that it's been reported that she had no support at home. Sometimes even when a woman is near the threshold of viability like she is, and you do, for example, even though her dating may say she's 21, 22 weeks, but you do the estimated fetal growth scan or fetal weight scan, and you determine that, oh, based on the grams of the baby, this baby is even closer to viability than we thought. And so you keep her in-house and you counsel her based on the options of whether to resuscitate and intervene with the baby or whether or not to allow the baby to pass peacefully. But also it gives you the opportunity to give her respectful a respectful journey of her pregnancy loss, right? So not only do we typically allow women to, or admit women to the hospital so we can monitor them for all the things we talked about, because one of the things that ultimately happened in one of the reports, when it went back to the house, the toilet was filled with tissue and it was filled to the brim with blood. One of the top causes of maternal death in the US is hemorrhaging. And it's regardless of the gestational age. So people typically think of hemorrhaging with a full-term delivery, or at least a more advanced preterm delivery. But even the most severe preterm pregnancies can result in hemorrhaging. Even a first trimester loss can result in hemorrhaging. And so to see that that's ultimately what happened, that led her to go back to the hospital, is devastating. And then, so typically we would monitor for all of these outcomes, monitor for the baby's viability, monitor for the baby's growth, depending on how long the pregnancy continued to last. Because as you mentioned, some of these pregnancies can last weeks after the ruptured membranes. And then also counseling the patient based on that. And then watching her for these potential outcomes. And ultimately, once the mom delivers, then you give her a respectable process, right? You help her to hold the baby. You ask her, well, do you want to hold the baby? Do you not want to hold the baby? Different women make different decisions as to what they are going to do with their processing of their pregnancy loss. And so sometimes you allow them to be with the baby, the parents to be with the baby after birth. And it doesn't even matter, the gestational age. Once there's a formed fetus that is recognizably formed, so we're not talking about a 10-weeker or a 6-weeker where you're basically going to see fetal tissue, but where you actually see the formation of a human being. You allow the parents and the loved ones to process and grieve the loss as any other loss, whether you lose your parents or you lose your siblings or you lose your friends. You allow people the respectable time to process that loss. So one, had she not gone back to the hospital, for example, or had she hemorrhaged even more and dropped her crit, thankfully she may have had a decent hemoglobin, which may have saved her life, but she could have potentially died. And that's the other point we want to get to, is that once again, she could have become part of the Black maternal mortality statistic. And a lot of people, when they think of the Black maternal mortality statistic or any maternal mortality stats, they're thinking about the later pregnancies. They're thinking about the further pregnancies. But women die in early pregnancies also. So it's very possible that not only was she criminalized, but she could have literally been near death or died. Or have some consequence of severe anemia, which people can have a multitude of things. They can stroke out. They can have a heart attack when they're severely anemic. So a lot of things really could have happened to her. And it's really sad that had she gotten respectable care and compassionate care, that she wouldn't have had to deal with these outcomes.
Just even the basic standard of care. I mean, I'm not in Ohio, I'm in California, but that doesn't really clock with how we practice maternal health here in the United States. And I know there's a lot to be desired there, but this is basic, right? This is like basic standard healthcare for a woman who is pregnant, a woman who already has, like you said, a baby that is already developed into what looks like a baby and essentially had a stillbirth. This is not even a miscarriage. This is a stillbirth.
Yes. So let's talk about that part, right? Because I think part of the assumption that may have led to the cops going to her home or the reporting by the nurse is the question of whether or not she truly ended up aborting the baby at home. And let's talk about the assumption of Black women abortions. Okay. So there's an ongoing assumption that abortions are just, frivolously being utilized by Black women. It's part of the stereotype that Black women are one of the top number of groups that utilize abortions. And so a lot of these laws, a lot of the criticism of these laws is that it's really ultimately targeting Black women specifically and our fertility. So one of the assumptions that probably was made, which is part of the stereotypes and part of the current disparity in medicine, is the assumption that, did she abort this pregnancy? And so they go to the home. The cops, apparently the coroner reached in the toilet, thought they felt an extremity, and that led to the cops removing the toilet and subsequently the fetus was found. They then did an autopsy. They then did a coroner's evaluation or examination, and it was determined that there's no way this child survived or was alive at the time of childbirth, that this child had in fact passed inside of the womb. So she had an intrauterine fetal death, otherwise known as a stillbirth, and ultimately delivered a stillbirth, which for anyone who's helped a woman deliver a stillbirth, it is a very uniquely difficult experience. So why is this case even happening? If it is confirmed that it was a stillborn, why are we at trial? Why is this case even happening?
I mean, from what I understand and what I've read, again, it goes back to the new laws and overzealous people trying to prove a point. I mean, I'm sure there's racism, but it's the fact that a lot of the protections have been taken away for women. And it's the fact that we want to criminalize women for these things. Racism, sexism, all the isms. I really can't understand it. I mean, even like you said, the assumption that she went and terminated at home, for example, that could have easily been overturned if she went to the same hospital she had been at. There would be records that she went 3 times.
Right.
Any nurse, or twice, any nurse who sees a patient does a detailed history intake. You would ask her, what happened? I miscarried. Have you been to the hospital? What's the last time you saw a doctor? Those are regular, normal questions. She would have said yesterday, 2 days ago. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't really see. I know in 2019, there was another similar case of stillbirth, also in Ohio, where they applied the same law. Back then, Roe v. Wade hadn't been turned, so it wasn't really very successful. She got 3 years of probation and went down to 1 year and barely did that, right? But now that we can kind of criminalize women and persecute women for, again, I'm not exactly sure why. I don't even know how to answer your question, Dr. Moore, because I don't really know. The answers that come to me seem a little bit too egregious to be the answer. It can't simply be racism, sexism, and we want to criminalize women who lose their babies. Like, it can't be that.
But isn't that what it seems like?
I mean, it
Racism,
seems like it,
sexism,
but
criminalize women, control women's reproductive rights.
Yeah. And again, I don't know why anybody would want to support this. This is why I get so angry when I hear what's happening, is because this is how it happens. This law, again, that they're using was created to stop people from digging up dead bodies and having sex with dead bodies. Let's be clear, or doing crazy things to dead bodies. Not this, but now you can cherry pick and you can do these things with a woman who had a clear history, a pattern of a wanted pregnancy, of wanting to protect this pregnancy, who then was left out alone in the cold to figure it out, who got scared. I read that the reason they brought charges was because it was so egregious. They said, you know, she gave birth in the toilet and the baby clogged up the tubes and she just went about her day. So that's a crime, and that's why we're criminalizing. That's why we're charging her.
So let's talk about that, Olivia. Let's talk about the fact that oh yeah, I need to push my glasses up to talk about that part, because seriously, let's talk about that. You know, the normalization, or let's say the restriction on how a woman is supposed to respond with the sudden loss of her child.
She went back to the hospital. I don't know what. First of all, I don't know about you, but if I knew nothing about what was happening, if I weren't a healthcare provider, even as a healthcare provider, if I get birth to my baby who was dead, my toilet is overflowing with blood, I am freaking out. Really, everybody's expecting women to make these clear, best decisions under duress? Emotionally, hormonally, she's all over the place. She's already reached out to the system that has turned its back on her. What do you want her to do now? Who is she supposed to call? Not the hospital. She's not supposed to go to the hospital because she sees that they don't care about her. Why would she call the police? She's done nothing wrong. So maybe she got scared. Maybe she ran away and she went to the hospital. What do they mean she went about her day? She couldn't have. She was bleeding out. She went back to the hospital. The hospital called the cops. What are they talking about?
Yes. You're
just can't put me on the stand.
It's yeah, they need you as an expert witness for real, because it's so true. It's so inconsistent. The assumptions and the conclusions about her character is so inconsistent from her actual actions, right? And then also let's talk about the fact that in your current state, do you know what the laws are regarding a corpse or if you had a miscarriage? Do you know what to do? Has anyone ever told you how to care or how to process your miscarriage? Or in
And
this case, your stillborn, your unexpected birth at home that led to either immediate neonatal death or an intrauterine fetal demise, as in this case. Has anyone ever shared with women what to do? So here you are in a system, no one shares what the laws and the expectations are, and clearly the hospital didn't do that. And so she didn't even know what law she could potentially be violating. She wasn't even given the opportunity to process this correctly because she didn't have any support. She had no guidance, what seems to be no guidance and no support system. And then let's talk about the fact that we're talking about her being criminalized, but where's the hospital's accountability? Where's the accountability for the hospital and how they treated her and their role in this process? If you're going to take her to court, then you need to take the system to court with her, because it's a system that led her to make the decisions that she made out of desperation for the lack of care that she did not receive by the system, even though she sought the system to help her. So if you're going to say, if anyone needs to be taken to court, it should be the system that left this woman in abandonment.
That failed her.
That
failed
absolutely failed her.
And I really think the important piece, I mean, we can go on about the details, the medical facts, the legal facts, but I think moving forward, I think it would be smart of everybody, all of us, is never forgetting, never dehumanizing somebody. See that those statements, like I said, she just went about her day. That all goes to trying to criminalize her, making it seem like she did something wrong and actually nefariously, like on purpose, right? Instead of really trying to understand what happened, right? Like how you and I have dissected it. This means this. This is what this would actually look like. Do you know what that means? Do you know how that feels, what that lived experience is? And now what? Now what is her recourse? I mean, you asked, do you know the rules in your state? I was in another country when I found out I was pregnant, and the first thing I thought was like, I don't even know any of the laws or anything that even happens in this country to give birth. Right? But I've never had to, because I've lived in a country where I pretty much felt safe and didn't have to worry about my legal rights regarding my pregnancy. Now,
isn't that something?
Now that has changed.
Yes.
The state I'm in, it has not, thank God. But isn't that a shame, for a lack of a better expression? That instead of celebrating or taking a moment to really be where you are and connected to your body and connected to your partners or your spouses or whatever's going on in your life, a pregnancy, whether it continues, whether it doesn't, is momentous for somebody who can carry a baby, conceive and carry a baby. And to realize now that you have to think about protecting yourself, as a Black woman, being so clear that, you have to protect yourself now as your body and your mind from the law. It just keeps piling up, and it's a sad thing.
It is very sad, and unreasonable expectations, right? So if it took a panel of experts who couldn't decide whether or not they could intervene and help and assist with her, how could the average American read these laws and understand the nuances of these laws that are clearly so vague that they can encompass so many circumstances? And then
she gave birth, and now they're coming after her for how she handled the remains of her baby. But
okay,
let's be clear. If the toilet was overflowing with blood, who's gonna go fishing in a toilet overflowing with blood for remain? You see what I'm saying? Like, none of that even makes
unreasonable.
sense.
Yes. Unreasonable.
And if it was small enough to go into the pipes, that means it was not even in the toilet anymore. It went down, everything is clogging. You were scared. I cannot even imagine what that would be like. And then you want to act like I was in my right mind, that I should have known what to do. Who makes good decisions when they're scared? Who makes good decisions when they're in pain? Who makes good decisions when they've been abandoned and they don't know? How can you? You don't even have the choices nor the tools to make good decisions. Let's start there.
Right. You're absolutely right. And this definitely brings to mind something we kind of learned about before, when the initial conversations about these laws in the post Roe versus Wade era is, for example, when does a woman know that she's pregnant? And so clearly what what these particular laws and instances and unfortunate outcomes have unmasked is the fact that men don't really understand reproduction, nor do they understand a woman's body, and clearly do not understand the pregnancy experience of a woman, if nothing else. Because had they understood, or if they understood, none of these instances would be an issue. Not the one in Texas, and certainly not the 2 instances in Ohio.
But then that begets the question, why do we keep giving them the power to do so?
Because unfortunately, I need to put not just men, but mankind. Because there are some women also who
Yes.
do not understand.
And I really think that this is a really wonderful example of something that does not fit the picture that people think, right? So let's go back to people who are pro-life. When you say pro-life, you're saying, oh, abortions, these elective things, right? And that's what you don't want to happen, and that's what you're protecting. So that's why you vote for pro-life and for policing of women's bodies. This woman is everything you wanted her to be. She was pregnant. She wanted the pregnancy. She did what she was supposed to do. She sought the help. She did not terminate her pregnancy. Her baby died inside of her and then had to give birth alone. Is this what you're expecting when you vote this way and you take these rights away, that this woman should end up in prison or in jail or go to jail because she can't pay a fine? What exactly do you see what I'm saying? Like, this case is one that is like this is the repercussions and what happens when you do that. Is that this isn't even talking about when most people are talking about 10 weeks or less and you're having an elective abortion. That's what people are talking about, right? That's what people feel so strongly about. But that's not as common as these other things. That's not as common as a spontaneous abortion, meaning a miscarriage, a stillbirth, a complication, a woman having to choose between herself and her baby. I mean, there's so many things that thinking that you can play God in that way, as you're saying the other people are doing, is mind-boggling. And
It definitely is. No, you're right. It's definitely mind-blowing for sure. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And for those who may be asking, well, how common is this? Well, there are 21, according to the CDC, there are 21,000 stillbirths per year. That's a rate of one stillbirth per 175 pregnancies. According to the March of Dime, it's somewhere around 1 in 160 pregnancies. Of interesting findings between the years of 1980 to 2020, the rates of stillbirth has actually declined and has now been dropped from 10.6 to a rate of 5.8. So thankfully, we're seeing lower numbers of stillborns. However, we're still seeing a significant amount of women being impacted or parents being impacted by the loss of their child. So the question begets, what do you do? What do you do even now if you were to experience a stillborn?
Yes, I don't know, pray. I mean, God. I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
I wish we had a legal expert. I mean, except for maybe documentation. I know in many court cases, documentation is a deciding factor. Maybe you keeping your own documentation. A lot of the time when you have prenatal care or you go see a doctor, there are hospital notes. There's a card where they write down things like that. So maybe making sure that your documentation is always in order. So just in case things go, the unforeseen route, you have very clear documentation of what you've done, what you've been through, and what you're looking for. But besides that, that is a good question. I would love to know if anybody knows or what they recommend or what you recommend, because
Yeah, it's hard because, because of the variety, because of the differences in the laws by state. Like, this is not a federal law, this is a state-based law. And so it leans towards not just each state creating their laws, but also each prosecutor interpreting the laws, right? So here you have other professionals that are interpreting the same law that's telling the prosecutor, you need to drop this case. You should drop this case because it's no longer a valid case. Whereas the same prosecutor is looking at the same laws and saying, no, the laws are restricting me from being able to drop that case. So it's so hard to necessarily be prepared on the legal basis, but I will definitely say I echo your recommendation in terms of documenting your care, but also I would also add to that, and I don't know if this was even an option in this particular case, but if you feel that you're not receiving the care that you want, there's two other things to do. And I don't know how feasible this is based on where she lived, but one option would be leave against medical advice and go to another hospital.
Yeah.
Okay. There's plenty of apps right now where you can look up doctors who are safe doctors to go to for your care. So if you have to research who they are, where they are, reach out to people if you need to. Of course, it's kind of hard if something's rapidly happening, but if you have a day or two, then that's one thing you can do is look for alternate healthcare. Another option would be in that same hospital setting to utilize the hospital's advocate. So there's typically a patient representative or a patient advocate or ombudsman. You can oftentimes ask for a patient advocate who is supposed to be exactly what the word says, advocate for you and be a mediator between you and the hospital system. So those are some things that you can do. It's hard for people of color, especially Black people, to include law enforcement, just simply because we don't historically have a good relationship with law enforcement and have had multiple documented cases where we have called law enforcement and have ended up being on the opposite side in a jail cell, or in even worse cases, dead. And so it's kind of hard for us to do that. But if you feel that you have a good relationship or feel safe contacting law enforcement, then do so. Another thing, which is sometimes a little bit hard, especially when people may not even know that you're pregnant yet. A lot of women may not choose to share their pregnancy for a variety of reasons until they're much more advanced or at all. Some women until they deliver, but if you have someone that you can trust, which goes to say even before or at the top of your pregnancy, at the beginning of your pregnancy, find an advocate, someone that you trust that knows that you're pregnant, that you're willing to or feel safe enough to share that information with so that they can be your advocate, right? Because sometimes it's harder. Yeah, you may be able to talk down to one person and convince me to go home. But let me tell you, there are certain people I know in my life, Olivia included, that if I call her, be like, they're trying to send me home. I know she's going to show up and be like, wait. I know this law. And if I don't know this law, I'm going to call up so-and-so who I know is a lawyer who can help me interpret and let me know what my rights are. So sometimes it's a matter of being utilizing the same community. And even if you don't know someone, if you know someone who you trust, that person may know other people in key positions who may be able to help you. So utilizing the community, utilizing resources, learning advocate organizations that you can call also locally who advocate for women in pregnancy situations. So start to do that work even at the very beginning of your pregnancy. Who are the advocate organizations? Who can I call on? Who can I report when I feel like I am being mistreated? So those are some key things. And the other thing I want to touch on, one of the hard things about this is the interpretation of the law from the sense of she is being charged with a felony for abuse of a corpse. And the question is, at what point are we defining a corpse, right? Because all of these laws when it comes to gestational age and abortions have been so varied, but then how do we determine what is a corpse? Because if I am 10 weeks pregnant, you're not going to see a formed human being. You're going to see tissue, but are you still defining that as the equivalent of a corpse, depending on what I do with that fetal tissue? Even though ultimately when a woman miscarries, especially in early first trimester pregnancy, it literally just looks like a heavy period.
I would just like to add that I read that in Ohio, there is no stated law as to what you do with the remains of a stillbirth, by the way, or a miscarriage. There's nothing stated as to what you do. If it's if it's a person who was alive and is now dead, then you call. But otherwise, there is nothing written as to what you do with those remains.
What in the Ohio is going on?
That's what I read. Now, if it's not true, I'd love to see somebody say
no,
that.
I did read that. No,
That's
you're
what I
right.
read. So
I did read that also.
yeah.
So
So again, it's like a witch hunt. Again,
it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing. Why is this case even in existence? Why is it still going? It's just really, really, it's insane. It almost, and I know that it's the ultimate root of all of this is systemic racism. This is why the group that is primarily impacted by these laws are your minority groups, right? Because ultimately, if you're not a minority group, you're more likely to have resources, you're more likely to have access to advocacy, you're more likely to have money to go to the next town, which, again,
I would like to also add that when we say minority groups, I really want to say that that includes people below the poverty line, right? People who
Yes.
lack the resources. They are so included in that because poverty is a big, and I mean poverty really in the sense of the stats. I don't mean like, you're living on the streets. I mean, below the
Yeah.
poverty line, struggling, not having access to resources. That is also a determining
Yes, it's
factor.
also a determinant of health. You're absolutely right. And so what is the big picture of this? What does the future look like in the United States when it comes to women and pregnancy losses? What are we looking at, and how does this potentially impact other women right now who may be at risk or know that they may at risk? Because, for example, there are certain findings that we have in pregnancy where we could say to a mom, this finding does increase your risk of having a pregnancy loss. What happens to those women who are at home right now and facing the potential of a pregnancy loss and don't know what to do?
I really think that that is such a layered answer, but a couple of things that just jump out to me immediately. As a healthcare provider, we can always say, come into the hospital. Doesn't matter what happens, you go, right? Like you said, if this hospital isn't giving you care, let's do a backup plan. First thing is get prenatal care wherever you are, because if you establish prenatal care, it improves all of your outcomes, right? It really decreases even the chance of this happening. I don't know if she was getting prenatal care. I hope she was. But that alone, having a relationship with somebody within the system, or even a midwife who's out of that system, but midwives are in the system, even if we're throughout the system, already really decreases your chances of something like this happening.
Mm-hmm.
On a larger scale, I really think somehow we have to come together and do better education about what is available for women and what is women's health. I mean, whether it's in school and how we're educating our professionals, whether it's policy wise, we have to do a better job somehow of explaining what this actually means to everybody, somehow figuring that out. And my mind always goes there because that's what I'm studying right now. It's like globally, politically, and I don't mean politically like Democrats versus Republicans, I mean policy wise. How can we make it so that this does not happen and so that things are clear and understood? And it really goes back to education, educating women on the ground, right? Our prenatal education. What are
Mm-hmm.
your resources? What does this mean? How does this happen? And where are you safe? I mean, that's why there's been a big push for doulas, because doulas are supposed to be patient advocates that are with you and work specifically with you. You don't even have to go to a hospital. So it's advocacy and education. Because resources, we're not gonna be able to figure that out today, right? Racism, we're not gonna be able to figure that out today. But like you said, the thing that would really improve your safety is resources, knowing what is available to you, and education, so that you're not walking around scared and blind. And when things really get scary, you have something, you have a plan.
I love that. I love, and I echo everything and co-sign everything you just said. And I love the fact that you brought up doulas, because oftentimes when people think of doulas, they think of doulas at childbirth only, and they don't think of doulas as utilizing their skill set to help you through pregnancy in of itself, or even the existence of pregnancy loss doulas, which is a growing field. So knowing that doulas can support you at any point in your pregnancy journey, and certainly in your postpartum journey as well. And also, in addition to that educational portion that you mentioned, let's educate men on pregnancy. Let's get them more proactive and involved, because I think if they understood fully the experience of a woman, or a pregnant person, I should say, through the pregnancy journey, then some of these laws will not exist. And certainly as we turn into an election year, let's also be mindful of our representatives, of our lawmakers, who are our judges, and all the things that we have the power in our vote to control, because that's ultimately what happened here. It's the power of the voting pen that led to the laws that are now becoming the reasons of imprisonment of women. And our fertility and our reproductive health should never be weaponized as a form to criminalize us.
Amen. And also the plug
Mhm.
for we healthcare providers. It is making it so hard for us to do what is in our heart to do, and what
Yes.
we, studied and learned so hard to, and it's to take care of people. The fact that now you're so afraid you can't even do what you know you need to do, you will be risking your livelihood and everything, is also criminal.
Yeah, yeah. And I will definitely say healthcare providers also mourn the loss of their patients'
Oh
losses.
gosh, so
So if
so
you are her healthcare provider in this particular scenario and the law was preventing you from helping her, healthcare providers do experience grief when it comes
depression,
to the loss.
grief.
Yes, we do. We do repeatedly. You know, whenever there's an outcome we don't like either, or a loss of a pregnancy, a loss of a child, we grieve with our patients. And so I'm glad that you brought up that point. And that being said, Olivia, it's always good to have you on this platform. You just know how to break down these topics. Okay. I mean, just such great insight, because this was not an easy case. It was not emotionally easy to read. It is a infuriating case. Like, I'm really trying to keep my emotions at bay for y'all and my professionalism at hand. But it's as a woman of color, as being a part of the community that tends to be the most marginalized in the United States, and whose reproductive rights have been continually controlled by law and by the land and by men. It's another level of I'm going to resist using certain trigger words, but it feels very invasive. And so, you know, yeah. So if they want to find out more about you and your thoughts about this case and other cases and things that come up in reproductive health, how can they follow you, Olivia?
You can follow me on Instagram at This American Midwife. Yes, it's American Midwife. I was going to say .com. Long day.
Awesome, awesome. And this is Dr. T. Always a pleasure to be the hand behind the handle of Healthy Bump Club here on YouTube. And thank you to all of our new subscribers. We see you guys. Thank you for joining us. And make sure, if you haven't subscribed, that you hit that subscribe button. We appreciate you following and supporting our platform, where we bring these very pressing topics to for our community, to our community. And always, you can share and follow us also on Instagram. You can find us at healthybump.club on IG, where you can find even more clips and more topics and more information about pregnancy, postpartum, and the fertility journey. And we see you guys when? Next episode. We could not be more thankful to have you a part of our growing community as we continue in this journey to improve the lives of women, specifically our womanhood, through our pregnancy experience and our fertility journey. We thank you for supporting HBC, and we're looking forward to the chapter ahead.